Mr. Antwon Foreman is a consultant, serial entrepreneur, social entrepreneurship advocate, and an entrepreneurship educator. He's the director of the Blackstone Entrepreneurship Launchpad in North Carolina A&T. Over the course of his career, he has worked with over 2,000 entrepreneurs and organizations across 7 countries on how to strategically use entrepreneurial principles to increase social mobility, economic engagement, and organizational development. His specific specialities are in the areas of entrepreneurial audit, entrepreneurial strategy, scaling, and turnkey projects. He has been entrepreneur for over 15 years and now splits his time between his entrepreneurial endeavors, being the chairman of the board for CAREE, that's Citizens Advocating for Racial Equity and Equality, and being a professor of practice in entrepreneurship at North Carolina A&T State University. His efforts have been recognized by the Department of Energy, Department of Defense, and other local and state organizations in North Carolina. He also acts as the director of the North Carolina A&T Blackstone Entrepreneurship Launchpad and Blackstone Launchpad HBCU Network Lead. So he is on a personal mission to elevate inequity with practical solutions and processes that enable others to be successful no matter their socio-economic background. He engraves his personal mission into his profession through his teaching, philosophy, program creation, and the social impact created by his business. Now, I would like Mr. Foreman to take the floor. Yes, so all yours.
No problem. Thank you so much, Kamal. Thank you for the great introduction. I've done a lot of things over the course of my career about entrepreneurial leadership. It's something that is extremely close to me for many reasons. And if I'm being honest, the last 48 hours have shown me even more why entrepreneurial leadership is important. I'm going to start by showing and sharing a presentation with everyone. I was saying Kamal did an amazing job sharing my background. I have been a consultant for 15 years. If I were to divide up the revenue that I've generated for my clients for every day I've been alive, I've actually generated for my clients over $782,000 for every day that I've been alive. It's been an amazing journey, and entrepreneurial leadership is a major portion of a lot of the accolades of which I've been able to achieve, and a lot of the motivation and really behind a lot of my work. Kamal, can you go to the next slide for me, please? A large portion of entrepreneurship, I think people misunderstand, and we'll be going over part of that during the session, as long as going over entrepreneurial leadership as a whole, some core traits. How is it different than other forms of leadership? Benefits of entrepreneurial leadership, how to become an entrepreneur leader, and why is it so important now? And then I'll leave some time for a brief Q&A. Can you go to the next slide for me, please? Kamal, does everyone have access to the chat? I love talking with individuals and not just at them through that process. So there's a few questions that I want to ask you. If you could put in the chat, anyone who gets the question closest to the right answer. So I want you to put your guess in the chat, and whoever gets it close to the right answer, I'm actually going to send out some Amazon gift cards, okay?
Wow, that
the first question.
Yeah, before
Yes,
you
ma'am.
begin, I'll just say, like, Christina, if you can take care of the chat session. So yeah, Antwon Foreman, you may go ahead. Thanks.
No problem. If you were to guess how much money is spent in research within universities just in North Carolina, how much do you think was spent on research in North Carolina? Put your guess in the chat. And by universities in North Carolina, I should specify. Someone said 5 million. Neil said 50 million. Anyone else? Ali said 5 billion, 1.5 billion. Zakayla said 1 billion, and Bassett said 20 million. I'll give a few more seconds. 3.5 being am I married? The universities in North Carolina alone, just the universities and university systems, a university across North Carolina, public and private, actually spend $10 billion on research. $10 billion on research. My next question for you. On average, what do you think revenue is generated from that research every single year by those universities? What percentage do you think they get a return on investment yearly on that research? Let me give you a few seconds to put in the chat. Neil said 70%, Sydney said 30%. Thea said 5x. Somebody said 25%. Zakayla said 10. Give a few more seconds. See, 50, 55%. The norm on short-term ROI, so within 1 to 5 years of that research that's generated regularly, it's only 1% of revenue. 1%. Okay? I'm gonna ask a couple more questions. My next question is, what percentage of companies do you think fail because of lack of strategy that does not correlate with incremental results? What percentage of companies do you think fail because of a lack of strategy that does not produce incremental results? I'm seeing 90, 40, 80. Y'all in the right direction. 50% of companies fail because of a lack of strategy connected to incremental results by Harvard Business School. A few other stats. 30% of companies fail due to a slow adaptation to change. 30%. 42% of companies fail because they don't adapt to disruptive innovation. And companies are 3 times more likely to fail due to not having innovative leadership, according to McKinsey. 3 times more likely to fail. I bring that up because when people think about leadership, honestly, oftentimes entrepreneurial leadership doesn't come up in that conversation. And I think it's partially because we look at the word entrepreneurship wrong. Come on, can you switch slides for me? When we think about entrepreneurial leadership, we directly tie directly to entrepreneurship. And most people, when they think about entrepreneurship, they simply think about starting a business. They think about an LLC or a corporation. We think about Apple. We think about Amazon and all of these other organizations. But in reality, I challenge people regularly to think about entrepreneurship as a process of value creation. What entrepreneurship really is how do you create value? How do you position that value? How do you communicate that value? And how do you retain some of the value that you created? And when we look at entrepreneurship from that perspective, we broaden our aspect of entrepreneurship. And it requires us to do that to fully understand entrepreneurial leadership. Come on, can you go to the next slide for me? Entrepreneurial leadership refers to the practice of leading an organization or team with a focus on innovation, adaptability, proactive decision-making, but strongly from a standpoint of empowering everyone in that team to do what they've been trusted to do. Entrepreneurial leadership tends to not hinder on micromanaging. It understands that everybody has a talent, everyone has a gift, and holds them up to the standards of executing that talent in their own respective areas so the entire team can go within a certain direction. There's a lot of qualities and traits that make entrepreneurial leaders different. And oftentimes we think about leadership as a whole, we use terms like laissez-faire leadership. Many people in interviews describe themselves as servant leaders. You have authoritative leaders. And also, we use the word transformative leaders a lot. Kamal, can you switch the slide for me? I usually wouldn't put this amount of information on one slide, but I wanted you to really look through and analyze the difference in traits between entrepreneurial leaders versus other types of leaders. Oftentimes, when in interviews, when individuals ask what type of leader are you or describe traits of the leader you are, people use words like visionary, innovative, risk-taking. They talk about their collaboration skills, their empathy skills, and decision-making skills. And what this shows is actually, if you were ranking different types of leadership on a 1 to 5 scale, the values they'd find important based on a lot of research. When you look at the entrepreneurial leader across the board in comparison to autocratic, transformational, democratic, laissez-faire, and servant, they're very high in visionary aspects. They're very innovative in their approach. They actually embrace risk-taking a lot. In terms of efficiency, they're moderate on efficiency, but partially because they understand with risk, oftentimes comes failure. And you can learn from those failures in the long run. They're highly collaborative. And empathy, it seems like a lack sometimes that people believe they're lower on empathy. But when you realize that empathy is less on individual empathy and more on team dynamics, the entrepreneurial leaders oftentimes are quicker to fire in aspects and slower to hire because they want to make sure that team is cohesive and you're bringing individuals together. They value decision making as a whole, not just within themselves, but also within their team and their team's ability to actually make decisions on their own. They have high motivation. Moderate delegation is balanced because they understand that they lead from the front and the back sometimes. And they have a moderate level of control. Most entrepreneurial leaders don't mind giving up control and understand sometimes you have to let people do what they do best, and that leadership is oftentimes fluid. Can you go to the next slide for me, Kamal? A lot of the benefits of entrepreneurial leadership lie in its ability to be both innovative, but also get things to the market extremely fast. Some of the benefits within the organization are things like standards of communication, adaptability and flexibility, empowerment and motivation. It's interesting because when you research individuals who've been under entrepreneurial leaders, they oftentimes say that they feel like they run the company and they're running their own department or their own organization within the company. They're proactive and problem solvers. A lot of times the entrepreneurial leaders aren't looking at how to maintain status quo and how to maintain the situation as it is, but rather how do we learn from our failures, how do we identify gaps and bring value to all stakeholders overall. And when you really think about it, that brings forth a competitive advantage oftentimes between entrepreneurial organizations, especially when you think about organizations like Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, even when you think about individuals like Elon Musk, a lot of the things they do, people think are on the edge and pushing the envelope. But that's actually a large portion of what entrepreneurial leaders do. Can you switch slides for me, Kamal? When becoming an entrepreneurial leader, a large portion of that journey honestly lies within the mindset and values instead of communication and control styles. Many entrepreneur leaders have an entrepreneurial mindset. And if I had to break the spectrum of that down into categories, that usually means they have a great locus of control, they have good self-efficacy, they actually practice various leadership skills because oftentimes they're also an adaptive leader. They also have a high emotional intelligence, and they have a low risk aversion. When building the components of that mindset and the structure of those values, they also tend to value the contribution of other individuals. Entrepreneurial leaders understand the value they have as a person, but they also look at the value every person their team brings. So they tend to also be very selective. And that's where that high emotional intelligence actually comes in. Oftentimes they watch their teams, they watch how they work, and they're very intentional on how they draw individuals together as a whole. Kamal, can you switch the slide for me? A large portion of why it is entrepreneurial leadership is important, honestly, is because they really go through the dynamics of really adaptive organizations. Entrepreneurial leadership is a huge portion of how things are going, if I'm being honest. When you look at the dynamics of technology, artificial intelligence, how things are adapting over time, I've been in a number of meetings with the Department of Defense and Department of Energy discussing how there are issues regarding how we've historically adapted to innovation in the last 10 to 20 years. A large portion of those conversations have been on our positioning as a nation in regards to how we impact and how we engage the rest of the world. And honestly, we're starting to have conversations about how entrepreneurship and innovation are national security risks and issues in ways that we never thought about before. For the first time in history, we're looking at economics in a standpoint of not just how to grow communities, how to grow personal wealth, but we're also talking about entrepreneurship innovation from a standpoint of how do we really begin to piggyback and grow and stabilize economies from a standpoint of economic stability for other nations. So, for example, there's students at A&T who are working on projects looking at the Kenyan economy as a whole and key factors and areas and breaking down that Kenya economy in ways that we can look at industries, figure out how those industries play within the region. How do we spark entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial leaders, and innovative leaders who use entrepreneurial leadership and be able to build those areas up? So therefore, America does not have to reinforce these countries financially, but instead, you're actually using entrepreneurial leadership and injecting entrepreneurial leaders so they can build based on their gaps from within and build from things that their communities are seeing and making sure that they're economically strong and actually stable from a national security standpoint. Oftentimes, too, when you think about artificial intelligence and entrepreneurial leadership, a lot of the generative AI and asking AI questions and probing AI actually comes from a standpoint of one, knowing a wide range of things from the AI standpoint or from the technical standpoint, but also thinking from the innovative perspective. A large portion, while a lot of organizations look at entrepreneurial leadership as a whole as something that's valued, whether it be on the top level with C-suites, on the bottom level with actual employees, is they understand that entrepreneurial leaders are always trying to fix the clock, not just play a role in that clock. So at every level, by having those entrepreneurial leaders in that process, it allows the organization to see the kinks and honestly communicate past different levels of management to make sure things are getting done. And if everyone is treating the business as if it's their own, it allows them to have that ownership, the buy-in, increased motivation, but also to make sure that organization keeps a competitive advantage, especially on the technology side and on implementation. Next slide for me, come on. Oftentimes when we think about innovation, we usually only talk about product innovation. And one of the things that I talk with individuals about all the time, and specialize in talking with individuals about, is how by only looking at product innovation, we actually overlook 9 other areas of innovation as a whole. We overlook process innovation, service innovation, and many other types of innovation that correlate with it. Oftentimes, it's because we undervalue entrepreneurial leadership that we do not see the activation within organizations. And when you really think about it, it's one thing to implement the product, innovate the product itself. It's an entirely different thing to be able to make sure that product can integrate within the organization and that everyone has that product as a tool or a service to make sure everyone grows in accordance. I always say that you have to make sure that the organization, in many ways, are now outgrowing its own staff and employees and its internal stakeholders in order to serve the external stakeholders, but also that the organization is actually keeping pace with society, in many ways outpacing society. And the only way to do that is to instill a level of entrepreneurial leadership at a rate that society is growing. In most of human history, technology has actually been growing at more of a linear rate. In the last 15 to 20 years, you can say that line has become very exponential. And when looking at that process overall, in my opinion, it's going to require us to adapt students to be change makers and entrepreneurial leaders as a whole in order to make sure that they're actually, one, keeping pace individually with the way technology is going, but organizations are going to need entrepreneurial leaders at every single level to make sure they're keeping pace and therefore they don't become obsolete as an organization. I love taking a decent amount of time to answer Q&A questions about entrepreneurial leadership because it is a completely different approach than we talk about in many classes. If I'm being really honest, even within my own entrepreneurship classes at A&T, we don't see that term being brought up enough. And I want to make sure to give students time to be able to talk through the nuances of entrepreneurial leadership versus other types, but also to ask questions about how it can be implemented. especially across industries. So with that, one, I thank you for your time, but I also want to be able to give you time to ask questions about the subject.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Foreman. Now the floor is open for everyone. Please come up with the questions that you have. You may even drop it in the chat box so that we can share it with Mr. Foreman. Yeah, so it's open for all now. And you may even unmute and directly ask if you have some questions.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Awesome. First, I want to say thank you, Mr. Foreman. I really liked your presentation, and it definitely pertains a lot to myself. I'm an almost graduate. I'm about to graduate with my civil engineering degree. So I do have a question for you. What advice would you give to an almost graduate trying to get into entrepreneurship education to eventually run my own business?
A major portion of it, honestly, goes back to that value creation piece. I would challenge them to look at the industry almost like they were competing with it and find the gaps in it, right? And really, this is a two-pronged question. When you're graduating, if you're going into an organization, entrepreneurial education, you want to make sure you're understanding it and looking at it as an opportunity to engage with the industry. So, for example, many of my mentees, really almost all of them except for one, have been promoted within 6 months to a year of entering a corporation or any other industry they go into outside of entrepreneurship. And others, most of them graduate with a business and or have side businesses when they graduate. A large portion of that is because I oftentimes tell them it's their job to integrate and bring value in every process. So for one, I challenge you to look at the gaps and figure out where you can bring value, Sydney, based off your strengths and your gifts. Everybody has talent, strengths, and gifts they can contribute. But oftentimes, a huge issue is we tend to bring only what's expected, not all that we can. Two, work on that locus of control and taking the initiative all the time when you're going to entrepreneurial leadership and understanding that you have a responsibility to bring value into your environment, but also you have the capability to do so. And then three, master the business model canvas. We use it in entrepreneurship a lot. I oftentimes tell people to engage and do that at a larger scale. And in different scenarios, it's called different things in different environments. So for example, in the military, they have a mission canvas, but it's literally just a business model canvas. I use that in everything that I do when breaking down and segmenting issues. So you always want to know the value proposition in the issue. You always want to know the key activities, key partners, and key resources. And what that really means, the minimum people I need to work with, the minimum resources that I need, the minimum activities I have to do to achieve that task. You want to know what are the customer segments, or who am I serving, right? You want to narrow those customer segments down to who really need me. You want to make sure you're communicating with them properly in your channels. What relationship and role do you have with that customer segment? And then what ways are you bringing value, i.e. your revenue streams? And what is it going to cost you as a whole? You want to map that out as well. But what is it costing you to bring that value to the area as well? But by using that in every situation you walk into, you have a personal framework of understanding that environment, but also a framework to understand what role you play in that environment so you can grow exponentially within that environment.
Okay, sorry, I was writing it down, but thank you. That was an amazing that was an amazing answer. I actually really do appreciate you, Antwon.
No problem at all.
So I really like, hi, my name is Su Hwan. I really like your, first of all, your energy and your insightful discussion and tip that you share with the students here today. My question is, if you could share with us, I'm going to put this in quote, a failed entrepreneur endeavor, and yet one can still learn from.
Failed entrepreneur endeavor. Thinking through some of my clients actually in the past. You know what? I think a major one I could think about, and just happened semi recently, is I had a client who actually ran hotels. He is the firstborn. His father actually built, as an immigrant, he worked his way up to owning 18 hotels. And he was buying his first one on his own. And I was helping him go through that process and work through to renovate the hotel and hopefully get the, what we call the keys up, or how many rentals you have per night. And it was a lot of pressure. I think one of the biggest blessings I've ever had personally, honestly, is getting paid to learn as I walk people through new solutions. So watching someone, as someone from rural Eastern North Carolina, who I can assure you my family do not own hotels. But watching him step up to the plate and say, I'm trying to, build and grow my family legacy. He's trying to use the exact same business model his father did. And we watched slowly as it did not work out the same way. His father wanted him doing his own. He wanted him to use his own resources and build his own partners, and just wasn't working out. But what we did was find his strengths and his gifts. Oftentimes tell people the first business you ever run is your life. And if you do not run your life like a business, it will tend to fail. Like 98% of businesses fail. So when he came to me and we sat down, I was like, well, I understand you're holding up the family legacy, but let's talk about what you do well. And what we realized that what he did well was he was a great project manager. He was great with his renovations team. He was great when delivering information, and he was great finding buyers. And what we did was create him a new business model to expand the family business, where basically we started to help him flip hotels like you would flip houses. And what we did is we came in and used his project management skills and renovation skills to buy rundown motels instead of buying hotels. And we would renovate, get the average daily rate up, which is basically the rate at which the rooms are going, and renovate any rooms that were not being rented because they needed help. And in a way, flipping the hotel and selling it at a higher price. And then he was actually using those funds to reinvest back into family business. And he talked with his father to be able to invest those funds so his father can buy more traditional hotels while he renovated and flipped the motels. And I think that was a great example of how sometimes things don't work out the way you expect. Sometimes you really have to take inventory of who you are as a person and bring that to the plate and not mimic other individuals. And you also have to be agile in your approach and how you're actually engaging with the ecosystem that you're in. Another portion of entrepreneurial leadership that I didn't talk about is that oftentimes with entrepreneurial leaders, they focus on what they do have instead of what they don't. So, for example, a major difference between transformational leaders and entrepreneurial leaders is transformational leaders look completely in the long term. And it's about those long-term goals and accruing the resources to get there. Entrepreneurial leaders are more focused on how do I get to the long term through incremental steps and successes. And they're very good at actually building the stairway to success and not just taking a leap to success.
That was great. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Do you have any other questions? So, Mr. Foreman, I had a couple of questions.
No problem.
Okay, so my first question was that I mean, I think like most of us would be from the engineering background. So my first question was that could you help us break the myth that we have that, we need to have like I mean, like a traditional education to become an entrepreneur, or like, say for example, if you're like a bachelor student or a master student or a PhD, or I mean, comes from a technical background, and we still have a potential to become an entrepreneur. So first is like how like we can break that myth. Second is like, while we all are studying and we are in our academic tenure, in that process itself, what should be the strategy with which we can come up with our own I mean business model, or like like start our own startup within while we are in our academic tenure. And then third is that while we plan to build our own team by being in the academic tenure, what all things we need to make sure, because we can't have expertise in all of the domains, but what I understand is that we still need to have some of the ideas, say for example of and that's where the motive of this workshop is also, that we are having speakers from different domain. So maybe we'll have like information on project management, we have on, I mean, later on maybe on finance also, and like different domains that are required to make this build. And also fourth, while we are students, how like, or I should reframe it like, uh, what's the mindset of the investors that, you know, they think that they want to invest in our startup. So
Okay.
these are some of my questions.
No, you're fine. I'm gonna try to go in the order. Just let me know if I don't answer all of them. Okay. Um, one, I actually should have started with this. I started my business in undergrad, right? I originally started it as a student. It's interesting now standing in classrooms where I remember signing contracts in the back of the room while in class. Not saying to do that, but it's interesting me thinking about it now. I think the beauty of entrepreneurship innovation, the beauty of entrepreneurial leadership is it does not have the same barriers. It doesn't have the same hurdles as a lot of other things do. Like I said, entrepreneurship is about creating value, and every last one of you have value that you can contribute to society now. Doesn't matter if you're undergrad, grad, or PhD. And that was something I learned early, is I had to do that. For me, it was to stay in school. So I started providing marketing services to local businesses and connecting local businesses to the college market as an undergrad student. And that slowly grew into what I do now. And a big portion of that, I always say, divorce the dream, date the process so you can marry your vision, right? Oftentimes we have things in our mind, we have that dream of where we want to go, right? And we could be so married to that dream, we do not go through the proper process to become the person that can more align with and mandate that dream and fulfill the prerequisites for that dream, right? And a large portion of that sometimes is taking that dream and breaking it down to a minimal viable product, right? What can you manage now? What can I do now to bring a piece of that value to the market? And giving yourself enough grace to know that I'm going to fail some, but with each failure, I can keep adding my pieces to that dream in the long run, right? And eventually I will grow into a vision I never thought was possible in the beginning. That could be done at every level. It could be done at every extent. The other thing is, especially for the PhD students and PhD candidates, I've talked to students at Stanford and Berkeley and a few other universities. And I always tell them when they're picking their research interest, right? A lot of people do it just from their interest. Look at how your interest intersects with what society needs. Oftentimes, to my personal students, that I care less about their passions and I care more about their purpose. Your passion serves you. Your purpose is a passion that serves somebody else, right? And oftentimes that minimal viable product is literally within that passion that serves someone else. That making sense? What was your last question? Because I don't think I hit that question completely.
So it was like, what investors basically, you know, are looking for while they invest for the student startup.
Mm-hmm. One, they look for your passion and they alignment for that passion and purpose. Two, they look for how you engage, right? But three, to be honest, they look for your willingness to align that with customer values. So, for example, I met the individual that worked directly with Uber when it first started. And he told me the story about him and his investor and his first two businesses failing, but his investor believing in his actual drive, his alignment with customers enough that he let him hold the investment for 5 years before they actually went into the process. and he actually came up with Uber. So make sure that you align with that customer and make sure you're showing that you have the drive to follow through.
I see. Yeah. Thanks.
No problem.
I think we have a few questions in the chat as well. I mean, maybe Basit, could you read out the questions for us?
So, for civil engineering, either as an employee or a firm owner, how does entrepreneurship really apply through actions?
It's everything about actions, honestly. Entrepreneurship at its core is about doing and balancing doing and thinking together. I think with civil engineering, it's looking at how literally everything works, but also not settling for what is, and instead pushing for what can be, especially in terms of how our infrastructure works and how society works as a whole.
Mr. Foreman, would you like to talk a bit about your Launchpad program that you have at A&T? Maybe people can get some idea.
Mm-hmm. The Launchpad at A&T is basically a center that instills entrepreneurial mindset and entrepreneurial skill sets, no matter the major or degree path. We've engaged with 6,000 students on our own campus in 18 months and about 500 from 30 other universities within the last 18 months. 90+% of those students have graduated with salaries over 90K at graduation, and 42 of them have built businesses that have collectively generated $4 million in revenue in the past 18 months. A large portion of the Launchpad is really instilling those entrepreneurial skills and entrepreneurial mindset and making sure we can learn how to use our talents, gifts, and strengths to be able to engage with the market, and understanding that you are your first employee, you are your first investment, and you're your first business. And if you do not treat it that way and actually develop yourself in a way that no matter what happens, you could bring value, then you have issues no matter if you want to be an entrepreneur or if you want to go corporate.
That's great. That's helpful. Any other questions do we have? And Basit, could you check, are there any other questions in the chat box?
Yeah, we don't have any questions. I think the only thing I would like to ask Dr. Antwon, it's more like so in order to be part of the launchpad, is there any process that we need to follow or is there anything that student needs to know in order to be part of it?
Just send me an email. Right now, there's students from across the country that go to events. So even if you're not part of A&T on campus, you're part of another institution. If we have virtual events, I'll send links out to our engagements. On top of that, on campus, we have stuff all the time. So there's no real sign up, anything else. There's really just your activation. I always tell students, it sounds messed up at first, but I would say I don't care if you're hungry if you're not willing to hunt, right? And a large part of the culture of the Launchpad is not just saying we're hungry, but how do we learn and implement hunting tactics to be able to build and grow. And as long as you're willing to hunt, I promise you it's a place you'll fit in completely.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Thanks a lot. So I think we are almost at the time. I mean, Dr. Karimudni and Dr. Richardson, would you like to add anything? Yeah.
Just thank you, the speaker, Mr. Foreman, and of course the student leadership. Every session that we see from this workshop, I get inspired and also proud of this SLC team and then the whole conversation. What a thoughtful set of workshops that you have put together, and we are so excited about the next session tomorrow and then on Friday as well. And thank you again, Mr. Foreman.
No problem at all.
Thanks a lot. So maybe I should just quickly share the attendance form also with everyone. Just give me a moment. Till then, I would like Basit to give some closing remarks as well, as he's the chair of the Student Leadership Council. So, yeah.
Hey, Kamal, can I add one last thing before I go?
Oh, yeah, sure, definitely.
Just wanted to add and share something personal. One, I apologize for being late. honestly, the last 48 hours have actually even proved why we need entrepreneurial leadership even more. I've been at the hospital with my mother, who has just she actually was sent into surgery a little bit ago. And watching her and watching the process, it reemphasized, honestly, the need for entrepreneurial leadership. The number of staff members, the number of doctors and managers at the hotel who are looking at things from what they can do and what they have at their disposal, and not just what procedure looks like. And I stress the fact with students, especially ones who are non-business students, there is a grave responsibility for all of us to be entrepreneurial leaders, for all of us to look at what we can do to contribute to the greater good and what we can do to contribute to the greater structure of society and humanity as a whole. And even when looking around at the technology and everything else within the room that I'm in now, in the hospital room, it shows even more why we have to continuously push the envelope, especially for our engineers and especially for our STEM majors, and really for everyone to contribute their thoughts and ideas, no matter the background, to make sure we push that envelope slowly, piece by piece, to make sure society and mankind as a whole gets better. And the more we do that, the more we not just impact lives, but the more we save lives. But I wanted to leave you with that.
Oh, thank you so much. So, thank you all for joining the session. Like, we truly appreciate your time and engagement. And a special thank you to Dr. Antwon Foreman for making the efforts to join us despite the unexpected emergency. Your dedication is greatly appreciated, and we value the insights you are able to share with us. We also want to extend our gratitude to Ms. Kirby and Ms. Stoa for stepping and keeping the discussion engaging while we waited. Your contribution helped ensure that we had a meaningful and productive session. And for those in North Carolina and some other states, we know the weather has been challenging with snow and cold conditions. Please stay safe, stay warm, and take the necessary precautions. So once again, thank you all for being here. We look forward for seeing you in our next session. Stay connected, stay safe, and have a great rest of your day.